on Chase Quinn's part while I read the questions from the deposition.
All right, any objections?
We have no objections. I've just asked Your Honor if counsel can specify the page and line number so we can follow along.
Okay.
Page 36. Okay, great. Can you state your full name for the record?
It is Chase Quinn.
Including your time working for Bobby, how long did you work at Cove?
About 25 years. I started when I was 16 doing various odd jobs around the place. The owners liked me so much they kept me on and taught me the ropes.
Other than Bobby and the people that hired you, have you worked at any other owners of Cove?
No.
I already spoken with Bobby Daly. It is my understanding that you worked for Bobby at the time of the landslide.
I did.
What was your title?
I was the head guide, although I did not actually do much guiding at that time.
Well, you must have read my mind because I was going to ask you about what did you do. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I'm specifically asking you with respect to the time that Bobby Daly was owner of Cove.
Sure. I was essentially in charge of the operations for Cove. I trained all the guides and supervised them. If there was a problem and the guides were not doing their jobs, it was my responsibility to either fix it or make a personnel decision.
What do you mean by personnel decision?
Whether or not that person had to be fired.
Did you have to run that decision by Bobby?
No. Bobby generally gave me free rein over the decisions.
Page 39. Did you ever have to discipline Sydney either before or after the accident?
Yes, probably about 5 or 6 times.
What for?
She was late a lot.
Do you know if she was late on April 30th, 2017?
No, she was actually early. In fact, she was the only guide that was available for the tour that morning. Some of my guides got caught when some trees fell over, blocking one of the main roads into our place.
So you knew that some trees fell over that morning?
I knew that a tree fell over at one spot on a road. It is not unusual up here.
Did you have a chance to observe Cindy Cooney with the group that morning?
I did. As I mentioned, she was one of the only guides there, and because she was new, I listened to her safety training.
Page 40. Prior to April 30th, 2017, have you ever witnessed a landslide before?
Once, about 15 years ago, when I was hiking in the Pacific Northwest.
Do you remember, what do you remember about the landslide?
I remember it had been raining in that particular area for something like a week. I also remember my buddy telling me that the past couple of months had been particularly bad for rain, and it was the wettest in the history books. The path we were going to hike was actually covered when the mountain gave way.
Do those conditions sound familiar?
No.
Well, one of the things you're in charge of is safety, right?
Yes.
Is monitoring weather conditions part of that job?
Yes, somewhat.
What do you mean by somewhat?
Well, if it is going to snow or be a complete washout, sometimes we cancel a tour or two.
Have you been paying attention to the weather at the time of the landslide?
Yes.
And you are aware it was raining the week before the slide, right?
Yes.
And you are aware that it was the wettest winters in spring in recent history at the Cave of the Breeze, right?
Yes.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right. Are there any portions of the deposition that the first question?
Yes, Your Honor. As counsel selectively edited one portion, we do have one small portion we'd like read.
Okay.
I did look at page 39 about halfway down. Do you see the question that starts with, did you have any problem?
Yes.
The question says, did you have any problem with her briefing, or did she give it appropriately?
I had absolutely no problem with her briefing. She overly stressed the fact that if something happened to the group or if somebody got injured, they had to wait together for rescue. It probably saved lives.
Another question.
All right. Let's call the next witness.
The plaintiff calls, Chris Cross.
Mr. Cross.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Dr. Chris Cross.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a meteorologist, and I also host a kids' education show.
What's the educational show about?
So the show is called Cave In, and it's about, exploration of caves and sort of the natural and biological aspects of the cave.
You also said you're a meteorologist. What education did it take to become a meteorologist?
Yeah, so my education, sort of as a whole, I got my bachelor's of science in earth sciences and my with a minor in theater at Penn Woods Tech, and then went on to the University of Florida, Gainesville, got my master's in geology, and then went back to Penn Woods Tech for my PhD in meteorology.
What does it take to get a PhD?
A PhD is a pretty complex process. Aside from general undergrad qualifications, high GPA score, once you're actually in the program, you have to do published research and defend your thesis. So I successfully defended my thesis. Not everybody in my program did, but I was lucky enough to be able to do that.
When you said defend your thesis, what do you mean by that?
So yeah, you publish a form of independent research, and then you go in front of a number of faculty and have to sort of defend this research.
And you mentioned you got your PhD in meteorology. What is meteorology?
So meteorology is the study of weather systems and its effect with the natural world.
Why are you here today?
I was called today to give my expert opinion on what happened in this case.
What materials did you review in order to form an opinion?
Yeah, I reviewed, the pleadings and responses, the depositions of Chase Quinn, the depositions of Bobby Daly, and the depositions of Max Petunia.
Did you come to form an opinion after reading all of that?
Yes, I did.
I want to talk about landslide. What is a landslide?
So a landslide is it's a natural event, and it's simply when this occurs when debris on a slope falls down that slope, and the natural inclination for that debris is to come down that slope because of gravity.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor, what has been pre-marked as Exhibit C1 and C2?
You may.
What is it that I just handed you?
Yeah, so C1 is a photograph of the landslide at Cave of Breezes, where it's completely obscured the main entrance to the cave. And C2 is the aerial view of the landslide and how it sort of affected the highway.
Your Honor, we move to admit what has been pre-marked as Exhibit C1 and C2 as evidence as trial Exhibit 2, I believe.
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay. How is this witness able to authenticate this document?
The witness doesn't have to authenticate the document because according to stipulation 12, both parties agreed that all exhibits are authenticated.
Fair enough. It's trial exhibit 2.
Your Honor, the plaintiff has blown up the C2, and we would like to use it as a demonstrative to the jury.
Are you saying that you destroyed evidence?
No, we blew up Exhibit C2 as a demonstrative.
You enlarged. You made it bigger.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, I request that I can move myself just to watch it.
You may move yourself.
That's why all the dirt came. You move it up.
Now, if you could for us put warning and defendant on the board.
Okay.
What are some warning signs of a landslide?
So there are three main warning signs of a landslide. There are three main warning signs of a landslide. There's history, precipitation, and changes in topography.
You mentioned history. How is history a warning sign of a landslide?
So history of a landslide, or history is a warning sign of a landslide, because if there was a landslide in the past, it's likely that it will happen again.
Could you write one history?
Yes.
You also mentioned precipitation. How does precipitation a warning sign of a landslide?
Sure, precipitation is a warning sign of a landslide because heavy rainfall on the soil will make it looser and more likely that it will be pushed down the slope.
And could you write precipitation now?
Sure.
You also mean change in topography. What do you mean by that?
So a change in topography means any sort of natural changes in or around a cave will likely result in, or changes in and around the slope will likely result in a landslide.
What kind of changes would be an example?
So a lot of times in slopes, there are these things called anchors that will anchor the soil to the ground. So in most instances, you see this through trees or sometimes even rocks.
Could you write topography on the board? I want to talk about this specific landslide. Was there any history of landslides?
Yeah, through my review of the materials, I found that about 50 years ago that there was a landslide in this exact cave.
Could you write down 50 years? Was there any any precipitation in the area?
Yeah, and when I reviewed the materials, I saw both anecdotal evidence and then through further review of the materials, actual objective evidence that there was above average rainfall in the area.
Let's take that one at a time. What is anecdotal evidence?
Anecdotal evidence in this case was the deposition of Bobby Daly, depositions of Max Petunia, and the depositions of Chase Quinn. All of them spoke about heavy rainfall in the months preceding this landslide and even the day before the landslide.
And you mentioned objective evidence. What was the objective evidence?
So the objective evidence that I found was the NOAA, or the government agency on observation of weather systems, published a report showing above average rainfall, I think about 190% more rainfall in the area of Steelton.
Could you write 190%? And you mentioned change in topography. Was there any change in topography in this instance?
Yes, there was. When I reviewed the depositions of Bobby Daly, Chase Quinn, they both spoke about a number of trees that had fallen in and around this slope.
What kind of trees have fallen down?
So I know Bobby Daly spoke about a tree, at least one or two trees falling the day of the landslide in the areas on the road of the Cave of the Breezes. And then Bobby Daly spoke about during the winter of this cave-in, or the winter before this cave-in, there was at least one tree that fell right before the entrance of the cave.
Could you write Main Road? You could retake the stand now. Your Honor, we would like to preserve the demonstrative for closing arguments.
Okay.
I want to talk about Cave of the Breeze preparation for this. How many entrances and exits were there to the cave?
There was only one entrance or exit to the cave.
Could there have been more?
Objection, Your Honor.
Most runs.
This witness has not been laid the foundation, been expert in safety and cave operations. Just
Counsel,
named
I hear
John.
you.
Assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, the witness would answer that, I expected the witness would answer that there could have been more than one entrance made from the cave. This was not about safety or procedures. It's simply, is it possible with his degree in earth science and geology, if it was possible to make a second entrance to the cave?
Anything else?
I just renew my argument, Your Honor.
Dr. Cross, is it possible that Cave of the Breeze could have made a second entrance?
Absolutely, they could have made another one.
Now I want to talk about the safety warnings. Did you read anything about their safety warnings?
I did. Through my review of materials, I was able to see that they only really had a minimal safety warning about the risks of cave-ins.
What do you mean a minimum safety warning?
The warning that they gave about the cave-in only really started about a month before, and it was the same generic warning about in the event of emergency, stick together.
Was there any warnings given about how to get the team out of the cave in case of a cave-in?
Nope, there were no warnings like that, just in the event of emergency to stick together.
Was this, you said earlier that you had made an opinion, based on your education, training, experience, on a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, whether this landslide was foreseeable and whether Cave of the Breeze was prepared. Did you form an opinion?
I did.
What was your opinion?
I came to two main conclusions. The first, that this cave-in was foreseeable, and two, that Cave of Breezes did not have adequate safety plan in place.
No more questions, Your Honor. May I retrieve the trial exhibit 2 from the witness stand?
Okay. And I'm sorry, you said no more questions?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
I want to talk about landslides. Landslides don't occur every day.
No, they don't. But again, this was also a debris avalanche.
Back to my question. Landslides don't occur every day.
As I said, no, they don't.
So they don't occur because the land on the top is dry and compact.
Well, that's one of the added benefits, but yes.
And the excessive water can lead to the land becoming wet and uncompact.
That's one way, yes.
And another way that the land can become wet and uncompact is also by change in the slope's material.
And that's a broad question, and I don't know what you mean by change, but yes.
So a change in the slope material could be destruction of vegetation.
That's one way the material of the slope could change.
So destruction of vegetation would be trees falling down?
Well, not falling down, they'd have to be completely uprooted to change the soil.
But trees falling down could be one way.
Theoretically.
Breeze had a landslide before.
I believe during my review there had been another avalanche about 50 years ago.
And the old owners told Bobby Daly about this landslide.
I believe that was in Ms. Daly's deposition, yes.
And according to your review of the records, the winter before the landslide, it was the rainiest season in recent history.
Incorrect.
You read Chase Quinn's deposition, correct?
Yes.
And in Quinn's testimony, he specifically says, it's been the wettest winters in spring in recent history.
The wettest spring, yes. The winter would have been snow. The rain, I believe, from my review, came from the spring.
So the prior season before the landslide, it was the wettest in recent history.
Yes.
And the day before the landslide, April 29th, it had rained.
In my review of Mr. Petunia's information, there was a report of rain, yes.
And the National Center for Environmental Information said that the rain was above average.
For a larger time period than that day, but yes.
And NOAA said that it was 190% above their average.
From February to March of 2017, yes, that's what the NOAA report says.
And you read in your review for testimony today that the season before the landslide, there were down trees around the cave.
I believe that Ms. Daly mentioned that she had seen some downed trees.
So that's yes to my question?
I don't remember exactly if they were around the cave, but I believe that she had said there was some downed trees on the mountain, yes.
And on the day of the landslide, there was a tree down at the entrance of the cave. Not the entrance, the main road of the cave.
I believe Mr. Quinn's deposition mentioned something about a tree on the road, yes.
I want to talk about Cave of the Breeze preparations for the landslide. You know about Cave of the Breeze?
Cave of the Breeze's expeditions?
Yes, the actual cave.
Yes.
So you know there's only one main entrance?
Yes, there's one main point of entry.
And there's one main exit.
It's the same point, yeah.
And Cave of the Breeze didn't make any other exits or entrances.
Not that I know of. I mean, I wouldn't do it myself if I ran the place.
And people, in general, make holes into mountains.
Not in general.
So the people do mine in mountains?
In specific to mining, yes, they would make holes in mountains.
And people also make tunnels.
For purposes of driving, yes, but generally people don't just make holes in the side of mountains. It has to be for a specific reason.
And Cave of the Breeze didn't make a second exit.
No, they didn't.
Your Honor, may I use the demonstrative of Trial Exhibit 2 with this witness?
You may.
Yeah, I request a move just to watch.
Can you see it? I can move it back for you.
No, I can't.
Okay. So this is a picture of what the cave looked like after the landslide.
After the avalanche, yes.
And right here in this circle is the main entrance.
Yes.
And so this whole mountain is the cave, right?
Well, not the entirety of the mountain, but that portion is where the entrance is, yes.
So Cave of the Breeze could have made an exit entrance over here.
Theoretically, yes.
And they could have made an exit or entrance here.
Theoretically, again, this doesn't show the depths of the inside of the tunnel, so this is
But
all theory.
back to my question, they could have made an exit or an entrance here.
Assuming that the cave's interior extends that far out, yes.
So that's a yes to my question?
Yeah, under that assumption, yes.
Thank you. the records, the emergency plan was to stay together and to stay put.
Yes, that's what Ms. Cooney told the team.
And this emergency plan didn't say anything about how to get them out of the cave.
No.
It was just to stay put and stay together.
Yes, stay put and wait for help.
And you saw Cave of Breeze's policies and procedures.
Yes, it did.
And nowhere in that policy or procedures did it say to stay put or stay together.
You mean written down? No, it didn't.
And in that written down policy, there was nothing about what their plan was as if a landslide occurred.
No, they didn't write anything down for an avalanche.
And there was no step-by-step directions of what to do if a landslide occurred.
Again, they didn't write anything down in regards to avalanches, no.
And for your review of the record, it took them 37 days to clean up all the debris in front of the entrance.
Yes.
And the team didn't have 37 days worth of preparations to stay in the cave.
No, they did not have enough supplies to last 37 days.
They need to get out very quickly.
Well, sooner rather than later, yeah. They couldn't last 37 days without food and water.
And part of them, so Cave of the Breeze had to react quickly.
Yes, and they did.
So they had to figure out a plan to do urgently.
Yes, they had people stuck in there without food and water, and they needed to get them out before they died of dehydration or lack of food.
Yeah, so they could have died in that cave.
Had they been in there for 37 days? Yes.
And so to ensure that they didn't die, Howard stepped in.
Yes, luckily he provided a machine.
Luckily, he did provide the machine that helped get them out.
Mm-hmm.
According to your review of the records, did Bobby Daly test this machine?
No, it was experimental from what I read.
He never did any safety checks on this experimental machine.
Nor do I think anybody at Cave of the Breezes would be qualified. I mean, Howard Stent is a tech genius. They don't have anybody with that sort of technical skill on their team.
But back to my question, there was no safety test done on the machine.
Of course not. They wouldn't even know how to.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Bobby Daly got on the stand here today and testified that they were lucky that Howard Stent brought his machine. They were lucky he brought it because they had no plan in place on how they were going to get that hockey team out of that cave. It took them 3 days to figure out a plan on how to get them out. My partner asked you to remember 2 specific points here today. 1, that the landslide was foreseeable, and 2, that Bobby Daly mismanaged his business and caused Max Petunia's injuries. Let's start with point number 1, that the landslide was foreseeable. You heard today from Dr. Chris Cross, who told you that there were 3 warning signs of a landslide. The history, precipitation, and topography. The first sign is history. If a mountain has had landslides in the past, it is likely that they're going to have landslides again. Cave of the Breeze had a landslide 50 years ago, and Bobby Daly knew about this landslide. He also said that heavy precipitation was a warning sign of a landslide. That the rain changing the land can cause it to become loose and it can slip down the mountain. He also told you that there was 190% above average for the Caves of Breeze of their rainfall. 190%. You also heard from Max Petunia, who told you it rained the day before the landslide. The very day before it had rained. An above average and a 190% of heavy precipitation. He also told you, Dr. Crisscross, about change in topography, that if the land had changed, that it was more likely to lose their anchors. And part of their anchors was trees in the ground. And the losing of those anchors would likely have the dirt roll down the mountain. He had told you that in his review of the records that there were trees had fallen down near the cave, and the day of the landslide there had a tree fallen down at the main road. You heard from Bobby Daly, herself, saying that she had saw trees fallen down. Change in topography. Every warning sign that he said for a landslide was there at the Cave of the Breeze. Every single one of them. Therefore, this landslide was foreseeable. And Bobby Daly didn't prepare for it. He didn't prepare for it by two ways. One, not having multiple entrances and exits. And two, not having a plan in place on how to deal with a landslide. You heard from Dr. Crisscross that there could have been different exits out of this cave, and those exits could have helped. You also heard from Dr. Dornberg, who said that possible that exits would happen, and that you could have made exits in 3 separate spots. He says possible. You also saw Kobe's policies and procedures, and you will get to take this document into the jury room while you're deliberating. And the only thing it says about emergencies plan is this: have an emergency plan and discuss what will be done if something goes wrong. Discuss what will be done. It says nothing about what to do, what will happen. It didn't say to call 911. It didn't say to do a head count. None of that is written here. And the reason why we need to have these things is because, as Dr. Dornberg said, that this situation happened fast. And the hockey team didn't have enough food or water to last the 37 days. So it was a time crunch situation. They had to react fast and quickly. So they had to come up with a plan. But they didn't come up with a plan. Howard Stent brought the plan to Bobby Daly. Bobby Daly said that she was lucky that he came around. They were lucky he came around because they had no plan on how to get those boys out of the cave. If it wasn't for Howard Stent bringing his, we don't know how long it would have taken them to bring those boys out of the cave. And because they didn't have no written plan, no thought ahead of time on how to get them out of the cave, they didn't do any safety checks, and they didn't know the safety procedure of this experimental machine. Experimental machine was their way to get this team out of the cave. And it had to be because they had no plan ahead of time. Bobby Daly had to rely on his luck, her luck, to get those boys out of the cave. Today we had to prove our case by preponderance of evidence, which just means more likely than not. So if you think of a scale, our scale just has to be 1% higher than the defendant's. 1% that our argument that Bobby Daly didn't run her business correctly, didn't prepare for a landslide. Which means there's going to be some facts in this case that are gray, that goes for the defendant's side. Like the United States Geological Service not giving any warning that a landslide would happen. the landslide showed Bobby Daly saw all the signs of a landslide. She saw the heavy rain. She saw the trees falling down. And she knew about the landslide 50 years ago. She had better knowledge of what was going on in her cave. And that is why the scale tips in our favor. Because cave exploration is like airplanes. They know that there's a possibility that bad things can happen. Life-endangering events can happen. And they have to prepare for all of the emergencies that could happen. That's why airplanes tell you that there's flotation devices under your seats. They tell you to look for all the exits. Because in an emergency, there's no time to plan. Bobby Daly didn't have any time to plan to get those boys out of the cave. And therefore, Max got hurt that day. That's why we ask you to vote Bobby Daly liable. Thank you.
All right, we'll hear from the defense.
Actually, Attorney Page, do you mind if I